Okay, welcome everybody. This is, we're titling this Sustainable Practices in Growing Food and in Food Waste. And I'm really privileged to welcome, first of all, someone that many of you guys know. Ms. Ferentz is here. She's gonna go by Marie, I'm gonna go by Tim. So it's great that she's her voices and questions are added to this wonderful conversation we're gonna have. We also have Matt Ryan, which is down on the bottom corner quadrant, and he is from the Talking Farm, and I think we've been with them about 5 years now, at least 4 to 5 years. And Mary Beth is with us from Collective Resources, and they've been a new partner we've been working with about 2 years, but really more last year. We were about ready to go in more full with them, but COVID happened. So I appreciate you guys being here and welcome. Let's kick it off with the first question, which is a big question. And that is, what does sustainability mean to each of you? And how are you striving to implement that in your work with your partner? Let's start with Matt. Do you want to kick it off first?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So when I think about sustainability, I'm thinking about something that's has longevity, that can be around for 100 years, 500 years. It's kind of, it's not what we consider conventional agriculture. So conventional agriculture doesn't have the current resources or all the inputs that it takes to pull off conventional agriculture, cannot be sustained for the next 100 years, meaning that it cannot continue at its current trajectory. So there's a phrase, I don't know where I heard it, some culture talks about when you make decisions for a community, you want to be thinking 100 years or 500 years into the future as you make decisions. And if the decisions you make can't be sustained in 100 years or 500 years, then it's not sustainable. And then the next level from that would be regenerative. And so there's kind of a new buzzword in agriculture now called regenerative agriculture. And it means that it's not only about sustaining your current level, it means that you're actually giving back to the planet, and you're actually, as you do all your agricultural practices, you're actually benefiting the land. And a lot of times when we think about conventional agriculture, we're thinking about taking from the land. And so regenerative agriculture would be a step beyond sustainable and actually giving back to the land. But sustainable basically to me means that you can continue to do the practices that you're doing for the foreseeable future, not solely dependent upon fossil fuels or high energy inputs, but has sustainability to it.
We may get into that a little bit later, Matt, too, when we're talking about, comparing urban agriculture and what you're doing with the other, and what do you put back in versus what they take out in their practices as well. So thank you. That's good intro. And by the way, we'll make sure we have our students, before they watch this, watch the video and information about each of these organizations so that they kind of already know a little bit about what you're doing. So if you haven't done that, stop and do that right now, kids. Okay. Mary Beth?
So, of course, I agree with all of the things that Matt said, but I have some different things to say too. So whenever anybody asks me what something means, I channel my father, who was really into the dictionary. And so I looked up sustainable first, and it's an adjective, and it's able to be maintained at a certain rate or level, which Matt said, very good. But sometimes what's interesting with dictionaries is to the second definition. And this one is able to be upheld or defended, which I thought was a really interesting add-on to that word. As far as sustainability goes, the best definition that I found was meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs, which is also along the lines of something that Matt said. And one of the things, so Matt said the thing about 100 years, what I've heard, when I've heard that phrase, I've heard for 7 generations. And so they're actually, you hear that, that term sometimes when we're talking about sustainability. So as far as our business goes, we're a mission-based for-profit company, but sustainability is in our mission statement. So our mission statement is to support sustainability through commercial composting and zero waste consulting. Matt gave you a new thing to think about, regenerative agriculture, a new term that it may not be new to you, but it's kind of the future if we're going to, sustain life on this planet, and that's the circular economy. So the way of doing business and the way of manufacturing things for the last at least 50 years has been the linear economy, which means that we've sort of been ruining our planet with the linear economy. And if we think along the lines of a circular economy where in the whole manufacturing, we're thinking about what we're going to do with our waste and using fewer resources and not ruining the planet while we're doing it, that's the circular economy. And collective resource is part of that circular economy because we're taking food scraps that now go to a landfill and cause problems, methane, a greenhouse gas, that contributes to climate change, and we're giving it back to the soil. So that's my answer. Oh, and so if you've never seen the Story of Stuff, it's a 20-minute documentary that illustrates beautifully the hazards of the linear economy. I actually watched it again today because I love it so much. And she had a really great description about linear economy, and that is that we cannot run a linear system on a finite planet indefinitely. The end.
Thank you. I love that distinction. That could be something I'll talk with Marie about having our students watch prior to this as well, if it's 20 minutes. I think that's something we can continue to refer back to too, I think, because it helps us understand what sustainability really means. And the economy, right? Sometimes the short-term versus long-term thinking, right? We've run an economy and an agriculture based on taking things from not only the present from the land itself, right? And the air, right? But also the future. And so I think that's a wonderful concept for us to keep revisiting. Do you want to take the next one, Marie?
Yeah, absolutely. So this next question is for Mary Beth specifically. Some of our questions we tailored to each one of you, and some we asked both of you. But Mary Beth, could you explain how composting has the potential to redirect the way we think about our waste management practices?
Sure. So this is something I think about a lot, as you can imagine. So there is if you don't compost, and particularly if you don't recycle, there's sort of a, it sounds kind of harsh, but it's sort of like a thoughtlessness about your garbage. Generally, you put everything in one plastic bag, you throw it out after dinner, and you don't think about it ever again. You don't think about how much you created necessarily, where it's going. You're just happy that somebody is just taking it away. And so when you start to compost and recycle, you develop more of a mindfulness and a thoughtfulness about your garbage. So when you take and separate all of your food scraps out, you realize how many food scraps you have, right? And not all those food scraps are going to be made from your food, from your cooking, right? Some of them are going to be because you bought too much and it, went bad in the refrigerator, or because you made too much of something, and maybe if week after week you're throwing out these same things, you might reconsider your shopping practices, your cooking practices. And so once you do that, you're sort of reducing how much food waste you have, how much you have to compost. And one of the other things that happens is that you see, you get a better picture of what's in your landfill container. And you know, this is if you're doing it right. Some people say to us like, wow, now I don't feel bad about throwing out so much food. And we're like, that is not a success story. That's not a composting success story. But so maybe if you look at your landfill and you see that there's a lot of plastics that you can't recycle, maybe you think about buying differently that way. Like, you know, trying to find, you know, a CSA. That was just a little like lead in to Matt at the Talking Farm, a CSA where there's not as much plastic that your vegetables come in. So, and then the same with recycling. Just because you can recycle something, it doesn't mean, it'd be better to not have as much to recycle also.
Can you tell us quickly, and I know Matt too, you'll talk about this, but what does a CSA stand for?
Community supported agriculture. Generally, and Matt will tell you more about this, but I think how it began, I don't know if it's this way everywhere, but it was generally seed money for farmers. So you would be committing to a box of produce, whatever was in season, you know, like that particular week. And the farmers would use that as seed money to get their season going. Am I right about that?
You're right, yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, let's jump to Matt. Did you want to go ahead, Marie?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that Mary Beth and myself, I believe, have both done the CSA through Talking Farm. So, yeah, it's all connected, isn't it? So.
I do like what you're saying, and I'm sure this is something we can draw out too, even with Matt too, about the thoughtfulness, you know, the mindfulness that you know you're talking about with that composting helps us do. We're thinking about our food, we're thinking about our waste, sorting this and that out. You know, I do think that's a really important thing. Otherwise, we overconsume, right? As Americans, we just kind of are used to buying. We don't know where it comes from. We don't know, you know, where it goes, right? And we just get what we want when we want it. And so how do we begin to thoughtfully think about what we're consuming, you know, where it's going, what we're buying, not just food, but all of these others. I like what you're saying as well. I'm going to jump to the next question for you, Matt, so we can kind of keep this going. Why should people stop buying their produce at Jewel, for instance, and do a CSA, or look to buying and supporting local produce being grown, especially in urban farmings or local farms?
Yeah, so one of the new taglines I hear people talking about a lot is know your farmer. Have you guys heard that? Know your farmer. And part of the idea behind that is if you know who your farmer is, you know their growing practices, you know who they employ on their farm, you know if they're using sustainable practices, if it's organic, if they're using pesticides, fertilizers, and you can actually stop by and see how they're growing their produce. Most of our food comes from far away, super far away, and we really have no idea what they're doing on their farms, so to speak. Obviously, there's certain guidelines by the federal government that people have to grow by, but when you know your farmer, you kind of know what's going into your food, and then if you then can support a farmer that's growing kind of aligns with your ideals, that's even better. So, for instance, we're growing organically and sustainably at the farm. The people that we employ are not being exploited. They're not exploited farm workers, so to speak. Everyone's kind of getting a fair wage. A lot of conventional agriculture indirectly supports a food system that exploits its workers. A lot of people call that modern day slavery. I was just reading in a book a couple nights ago about when they passed how you pay people. The only exempt category is agricultural workers. And so after they do 40 hours a week, they don't get time and a half. And so they have to do much higher than 40 hours a week to get time and a half. And so there's just this stream throughout all of our country's history, honestly, of exploitation of agricultural workers. And that still continues today. So if you know your farmer and you know who he hires, that's a good thing. If you know your farmer, presumably that means that the food is not being grown too far from where you live. And so food miles is a huge issue, just for nutrient quality of the food, obviously for transportation costs, but also really for food security. We're, in the midst of this COVID pandemic, one of the first things that people were worried about was food in the grocery stores.
Right.
The minute that stuff started to happen, our CSA sold out. And part of the thinking was, Jewel can run out of food, but Talking Farm will still have a certain amount of set food you can buy from locally. So it might be hard to get food all the way from California during the pandemic, or Mexico, or Florida, but Skokie's growing some food for you. And so if you know your farmer, presumably that means that your food is grown closer to home, and that provides some food security. So when you know your farmer, it just kind of connects the dots on all the social justice issues, so to speak, around food.
Yeah, I like it too. I was thinking about that linear versus circular economy that we were just talking about. Here you gave us 3 great examples, fair wages. You didn't even mention this, but the whole thing of, racial, right? The racial component that is, which is you're not the laws that were passed. I think you're right, was agricultural workers were exempt, and so were domestic workers, so inside the house, right? And so oftentimes people point to those laws as being really racist, and but also your other food miles and food security. It's great. Did you have any questions there, Marie, for Matt, or we want to extend anything? Or
No,
want to go to the next one?
I think just that's absolutely because of COVID, like the return of victory gardens, also the return of doing it yourself, gardening yourself, and just the benefits of that. Otherwise, I thought that was all great. I have another question for Mary Beth, and it is, are there places where composting is the norm? And if so, how is that community's mindset and practices different than ours? And in a sense, how have they gotten to the point where they have evolved to have that type of setup in their economy, in their world?
That's a good question. So one of the things that I do for Collective Resource Compost is write a blog every month, and it's something that goes out to to all of our customers, but it also lives on our website. It's called Greener Living Inspirations, Greener Living Inspirations. And if you Google it, you can find it. And this past month, I wrote about states and some cities that have food waste, like organic food waste bans in their landfills. So it's legislation that reduces food waste. So I found this great information. The reason I actually decided to write about that this month is because Vermont, it was actually like on Instagram that Vermont had a organics ban. And I thought that was kind of amazing that it made the news. But so I got this information. There's a really great map on the website of ReFed, R-E-F-E-D. And they're a nonprofit that's committed to reducing food waste. So they had this great map that showed the states that have these laws. And they are Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, and California. So California, I'm not surprised about. I'm sure you're not surprised either. They sort of lead on environmental things generally. What was really interesting, if you look on the map, is that Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Vermont are all clustered together. So what they have in common is that they're all small, but they're neighbors. And I think that peer pressure usually gets a bad rap, You know, usually you're talking about bad things that peer pressure feeds, but I think it can go in the other direction too. So I'm sure that like, you know, Connecticut was like, wow, Massachusetts is like organic, you know, food waste from their landfills. Maybe we should do that because they're neighbors. And so I think that's how that happened. There are also some other cities that have done that. They're also on the map, municipalities. They're Seattle, Minneapolis, and Hennepin County, Boulder, Austin, and New York City. So what they have in common, I think, well, so the whole concept of this blog post was start small but think big. And I think that what happens is you have like these people who are doing these, you know, these practices like, you know, adopting a zero waste lifestyle, which you need, but you also need laws. You need the laws to change, because the laws, you're only going to get so far with the consumer. You really need the corporations to be forced to do the right thing.
So, Mary Beth, what I'm hearing is, even though the end goal is for the law to be changed, that things that you're doing are grassroots that lead up to a moment like that, where a state maybe changes over. Is that accurate?
Right. Yes, but so we have to we have to let our representatives know that this is what we want. And we have to remember that they work for us. And I think that, you know, maybe we've forgotten that, but we need to vote for people who are going to do the right thing. And that's how laws get changed.
You know, I just want to note, this could be, if students are listening to this and excited about this part of it, this could be a project they work on second semester, is, you know, putting together some political advocacy on something like this for both local as well as state representatives. So thank you very much. We're going to keep this going, and you're going to jump over to Matt this time for the next one. Same thing here. In some ways, we're looking at is, you know, what would it take for all towns and cities to make space or room for support for local farms? And how would our country be different as a result of that? What does that look like? Maybe if you took what you're doing and put out a vision of that, you know?
Yeah, so our biggest challenge initially was just finding the actual space to do the farm. And so I think it took the organization from 2006, took about 4 or 5 years to actually find the land. And at a certain point, they actually gave up on their land search. And then the farm site, we have now, so the land we're using to farm is 3 acres, park district land. And so my thought is that there's park district land all across the country. It just takes municipalities and city governments to see the vision. Skokie, that it was a good idea, or that it was feasible, that there was no liability. It was a big process with lawyers and attorneys and all sorts of officials from our side that could see from a professional standpoint on why this is feasible for the community. But now that we have it in place, it's a bit of a model that could be used across the country if people so desired. But it takes, like Mary Beth, it takes some partnership between this municipality and the people. But I do know there's lots of available park district land that's vacant. The land that we are farming on now was doing absolutely nothing. It was no man's land. It was not being used. But now it's turned around to a total asset for the community, and all the folks in Skokie are proud of it. I mean, when they speak about the farm, they speak about, you know, their farm, our farm, the city's farm. And so it took kind of some convincing, I think it took more. I think people always like the idea. They just want to know if it's like going to be safe. Are you going to poison people? Is it going to be run efficiently? A lot of times when you're talking about bringing farms back into urban areas, I think it's a little counterintuitive, because for so long, these places have tried to put the farms into, there's a reason why they became incorporated cities and they became townships. They're kind of pushing the farmland out. and all the people move in. And so they're kind of saying, well, we want to go back to somewhat of the way it used to be, where we have farms closer to where people live. But one of the things that's nice is that we've, as the organization, we've kind of proved this proof of concept. And so it doesn't have to be as scary now for other municipalities to kind of jump in, so to speak. But at the same time, it takes a level of organization from, they can't just hand off this land to random organizations. There has to be some accountability, track record. So the organization they hand it off to has to have some credibility, has to be legit, so to speak, for it to work.
You know, a couple things I think of when you're talking there, Matt. One is, I'm a philosopher, you know, so one of the things I think about is what's the basis of the right to property? And it comes from John Locke originally, who said that people have a right to property if they're improving it one way or another. So here's this public space, and what do we do with it? And here you're like, look what's being done, not only producing, you know, vegetables and things to eat, but also the community kind of experience that's happening, the kind of vision of where we ought to be in the future, the kind of relationship-based economy, right? As Mary Beth was even saying, that circular economy. The other thing I wonder is there a network of community gardens like yours that, or maybe that's in the process of building, but I can see it sort of a really need for that, where you're taking a template like you've used there in Skokie, right? How did that work? And then it's being offered up, and there's sort of a wider network of organizations that are working to assist other municipalities that are working on this. Do you know of anything like that at all? Or
I'm sure they're out there. I mean, so when I usually describe the farm, I don't usually describe it as a community garden or a community farm. So there's two mindsets. There's community gardens all across cities. Part of me is a fan because I think it's obviously good. But when I think about their efficiency and their vegetable output versus ours, I'd much rather have it be kind of more of a professionally run farm. So that's a little distinction I usually try to make with folks. Our crops per square foot are going to be much greater than the average community garden. Also, too, from a personal standpoint, when I look at community gardens, I'm usually not attracted by them. They usually kind of look like this hodgepodge of mixed up gardens. But so there could be a way where the communities, maybe even through, I'm just making stuff up, through tax dollars, offset a certain amount of revenue for local gardens to offset their food costs or to grow their food for the community. But I think there's something to kind of a professional standard of farming in these areas that I'm really passionate about, because that's what I do. So a high level of production is important to me.
is your status like Mary Beth? Mary Beth, it's a for-profit, mission-driven organization. Is that kind of what you guys see yourself as too, Matt?
No, we're very much a non-for-profit.
Not-for-profit, okay.
We want to juggle both balls at the same time. So
okay.
when we educate about farming and we're growing produce for the community, we want to do it as efficiently as possible. So we don't want to be educating from like a philosophical standpoint. We actually want to be educating from a tangible, hey, look, we're doing it at this high level already. And then based on who you are, you can fit in some way. Obviously, if it's a kindergartner, we're not going to teach them about crop rotations and all these kind of crazy things. But if it's a college student that wants to learn about farming, we want to be able to teach them at the highest level we possibly can. So.
I think that ties in really well to our next question. And it's kind of interesting that you both have slightly different models on this standpoint, but the question is, how important is revenue generation as making like your organization's model itself sustainable? And that question's for both of you, actually.
So should I go first?
Sure.
So, I mean, as we said, we're a for-profit business, so we have to balance the number of customers we have with the number of employees we have. You know, that we can service our customers well, but that we can give our employees health insurance. And, you know, we work really hard to, you know, make it as good a job as it can be, given that it's a waste hauling job. And we also, you know, I'm happy that this is, that is not my job, because I think that that's, you know, it's a tricky balancing act. We also have to balance our route density. So like how many customers we have in a certain area with our, how big our service area is. You know, we'd like to say yes to anybody who wants to use our service, but if someone's really far flung from where we already go, we can't say yes yet. So what we're always working on is our route density. And yes, because we're a for-profit business, there are very few grants that we're eligible for. You know, nonprofits have more opportunities to be given money. We have been given some money. We got something called an F-SCRAP grant, which helped us to buy a truck, you know, a number of years ago. We've been in business 10 years, so I think it's like 7 years ago. We came really close to getting an Eileen Fisher, who's a clothing designer, award. I think we were in the top 10 out of something like 500 people, but we did not get it. But we will continue to, you know, when money's being offered up, to try to get it, because that can be really helpful.
So then, Matt, how does your business kind of compare to that?
Yeah, so we're definitely still very dependent upon donations, fundraising, grants. And a big reason for that has to do with that we do so much education. And a lot of times the education, there's really no money in education. And so to offset the costs, we need grants, fundraising, donations. But there's no doubt about it. Produce sales and farm dinners and CSA memberships, it's a real revenue generator for us and offsets people's salaries. So we're able to kind of straddle the fence on both things, which is kind of nice as a non-for-profit. But it's predominantly because we're doing so much education and training and stuff that if we were a for-profit, we wouldn't do any of that stuff, or we wouldn't do as much. So it kind of allows us to have a bigger reach.
Is your revenue, I'm sorry, go ahead, Marie.
I was just going to say, as a follow-up, like in the bigger picture of green businesses, is there like the longevity of either one, or like it seems like there's different risks for each of you and different hurdles to, like you had said, like looking, could your farm be there 100 years from now, and could your composting service continue to expand? I don't know what you guys think about that.
So as far as you know, our composting business goes, I mean, we used to think like we would really like composting to be free for everyone, you know, for municipalities to provide it. But, you know, we're finding, like, so we've been in business for 10 years. At the beginning, we did not have any municipal contracts or franchise agreements, not contracts, franchise agreements. And now we have 2. So it's like our business has, so we're, you know, it's sort of morphed a little bit. And what we can't predict is how it will next morph. We know that there's always going to be a need to compost, but you know, it's hard to predict the future.
You know, I had a question, one for you, Mary Beth, and then one for Matt with this too. You mentioned that, what did you call that with the 2 municipalities? What's that called?
It's called a franchise agreement. And what that means is that, so we have a container swap service, you know, it's, you know, 5-gallon buckets and 32-gallon totes. In Evanston and Skokie, because of our franchise agreement, the cost is a little less for everyone, you know, the residents and businesses in those towns.
Okay. And Matt, the question I had for you is, with revenue generation, which of these areas does it hold the most promise for? CSOs? I mean, what if you were, I suppose you only have so much land and so much produce, but if there was the real need, people are joining CSOs, they're wanting to buy local, wanting to support that, is that where really the long-term sustainability is for like urban farms?
Yeah, so anytime you can go direct to consumer, you're going to have a better price point. So this year, because of COVID, so the past 4 or 5 years, we've been gearing up to mostly do restaurant sales. And I think last year we had 10 to 12 restaurants on a weekly basis that were ordering from us. They order in bulk, they order each week. But once COVID hit, all the restaurants shut down. And so we had to pivot to direct sales to consumer. We have an online store now. You can pick up from the farm. Our farmers market presence increased every week. And the CSA kind of shot through the roof. And those are all better price points from us at the farm. But prior to COVID, we didn't really have that hook to do an online store. So it'll be interesting to see what people do in the years to come when COVID dies down. Hopefully they're still aware of local food and want to continue to support it. But there's a lot of competition in the marketplace now. Amazon bought Whole Foods. That means that now there's like a state-of-the-art delivery system for organic produce anywhere you want. Walmart is the biggest purveyor of organic produce. So all the big companies have kind of jumped on this bandwagon for organic food. And so that's kind of hurt some local farmers a little bit. But so now it's kind of, I think there's more of a re-education process for consumers, that it's not, organic is not the only benchmark of good produce. There's multiple layers to it. So I still think our product is superior to other big conventional organic growers. But it's continued education of the consumer through our products.
I think it's interesting that you brought up that Amazon bought Whole Foods, because for us it was like, okay, now we can't buy from Whole Foods anymore. So really it made us, like, as far as I'm concerned, it made me more likely to go pick my own basket from the Talking Farm. That's what it's, so there's the CSA. That's something that you can commit to at the beginning of the season. But this year, is this the first year that you had pick your own basket?
First year, yep.
Oh, first year, okay. Yep. So it's like the CSA in that you go and you have an opportunity to go pick up from there, but you get to pick, if you're fast, if you get to the online store fast enough, you can pick everything that you want. I never do, but I often do get arugula, which I really like. So that's what they're calling it, PYOB, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, let's jump to the next question. I'm kind of watching the time, make sure we're going to hit everything. We have 2 more to go, and maybe there's more, but this one was, maybe it follows out of this, right? But if you guys won $1 million award, is it the MacArthur Award or something, where that it's the Genius Award, right? And so all of a sudden you get $1 million, right? What would you do with that? Just, maybe you're going to buy a new car. I don't know, but hopefully for your organization is what it would be. What would do to scale up or increase your social impact?
Should I go first because I'm the lady? I will. So I actually asked our owner founder, Erlene Howard, this question because I was curious about what she would say, because I have my own answer. But I was curious about what she would say. The most, the least fun answer that she had was, a reality of small business is that she would pay off 5 trucks, so that would be nice. Another idea that actually does address the social impact is seed money for helping organizations that can't afford to do it on their own, to do like a matching grant for services. I personally don't think that's all that sustainable, because when that money runs out, oftentimes people just stop because they haven't really, I mean, in some cases they've embraced the habit and really want to continue, but they don't necessarily have the funding for it. So my idea was to buy our own commercial composting facility, because as much as we love being part of a composting community, we are sometimes frustrated with our partners who own commercial composting facilities. But when I was telling Arlene that, she sort of pivoted that to become one of the funders of Patriot Acres. They lost some of their funding, and that's why they haven't opened yet. This is a commercial composting facility that we're hoping that will open in Glenview. And so right now we haul to Chicago. If we could also haul to Glenview, that would open up the service area and make more sense to go even further northwest. And that would be fantastic. And we would have just a little more say in what happens there. So we want to own 51% of Patriot Acres.
I'll talk to Matt Smarchesi, Go ahead, Matt, how about you?
Yeah, so I obviously can't speak for the organization. These would be kind of my ideas. Our farm site's only 60% built out. So I think if we had the money, we'd quickly build out the rest of the farm. We would then need staff to farm it, and we'd need staff for farmers and for educators in the community. And then probably invest in some more farming efficiency tools, just to kind of expedite the farming process, make it easier for all the staff, but really increase our capacity to grow more vegetables, and then increase our capacity to educate more people about the issues. Those would be the things that I would try to focus on. But I think it'd be a good idea.
I did have one question with you, Matt, was the winter time, right? I guess you just sort of, there's that revenue drop maybe during that time, or I'm sure you've accounted for that, right? But is that something that you're just like, well, we're going to put that aside. We're not going to do indoor growth stuff because it's too costly for that, or?
And so if we had that $1 million, a year-round greenhouse, heated greenhouse could be fabulous. We do have hoop houses, and so that allows us to grow 10 months out of the year pretty easily. But only maybe a quarter of the farm is in hoop house production. So even if you're growing all the hoop houses into the winter, you still limited your kind of your footprint. But yeah, if you had the $1 million, yeah, greenhouses, more hoop houses, season extension for sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. I believe this is the last question, and it's the question for both of you. And so it is, what keeps you motivated to continue when most people in our society are not thinking and acting in the way you do in regards to food and waste?
Okay, I'll go first again. So I have two daughters. Clara is 24 and she lives in Denver, and Etta is 20, and she is actually an intern for the Talking Farm this semester. She's in her third year of college. So, I think about their future. I became a climate reality leader a couple years ago. That's why I have this little pin, which means that I did the training with Al Gore to talk about the climate crisis. And part of the reason why I did that was because I did not want my daughters to say, you knew there was something wrong and you didn't do anything about it. And so that motivates me. The other thing that motivates me is, I feel so grateful and lucky to be able to work in a way that aligns with my values. It's incredible. But I have this theory about waste. And I'm sure Matt knows this too. Waste doesn't exist in nature. And so it's an unnatural thing to do to waste. And I think that, so some people forget or don't realize that we're part of nature, you know, that it's not just outside and we're inside. We're animals, we're part of nature. And so I think that wasting is unnatural, and because it's unnatural, it doesn't feel good. And that's why composting and not wasting feels so good. And I want to help people feel good.
Good answer. Tough to follow.
That's what I always wanted to be. Is it tough?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's good. So I think what keeps me going is just there's so much work to be done. And I think when very similar to Mary Beth, I feel so fortunate to be doing something that I love, but also that has impact in the community. And there's a million issues in the world. There's a million problems in the world. But I've kind of chosen this one to focus on. And for the most part, my head is to the grindstone. My nose is to the grindstone, and I'm not looking up much. And there's so much work in front of me. There's so much to be done that I kind of have those horse blinders on, and I just focus on what's in front of me. And all the other problems, the 900,000, 900, whatever, those are for other people to pick up. And this is the one that I'm picking up. And we're just kind of charging ahead. And there's no time, or there's just no time to get caught up looking to the left or the right. And I think that keeps me focused, keeps me going. Obviously working with youth, working with kids, the education level of where students used to be to where they are now about the issues is 100-fold. We work with preschool kids, and they know all the words. They know about sustainability. They know about food waste. They know about a lot of these things that I didn't learn about until maybe 15 years ago. And so I see the next generation as being much more conscientious of these issues, and they're going to be the ones that we pass the torch off to and probably make even a bigger impact. So that's positive to see all the kids doing that stuff.
I think maybe that question was my favorite, or your answers to that question were my favorite, because it just kind of speaks to your motivation and how people like you choose to make these really big, bold changes. And also, my family always used to have a saying like, inch by inch, life's a cinch, yard by yard, life is hard. And it just kind of speaks to what you're talking about, Matt, is you got to just kind of keep going and think about little pieces at a time, and it ends up making this massive impact and change. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, thank you both for the whole thing, but definitely ending the way that you did. I think it's a wonderful, you guys are both, and your organizations are great inspirations for each of us. And I know the kids at Loyola too, and even at Loyola, right? And Matt in particular, we've been working at changing the culture there, and Mary Beth with the composting too. We're going to get there inch by inch, especially when we come back on the other side of COVID. So thanks so much. Keep up the good work, and we really look forward to continuing to work with you guys.
Thank you.
I'm gonna, if you guys want to hold on just a second, I'm going to shut the recording off, and then we can